Welcome to the Hope After Narcissistic Abuse podcast. I am your host, Amy Helms. Each week, you will hear from experts across the country and even world speak to you on recovering from narcissistic abuse and even how to manage these relationships. You will also hear some periodic solo episodes on how to manage these relationships and what recovery is like. It is my hope that you will leave each episode with some renewed hope that you can and will beat this. Thank you for tuning in. Welcome to another episode of Hope After Narcissistic Abuse. Today, we have a guest, Steve Bisson, and excited to talk with him today. He has a wonderful podcast and book that is in the show notes, and we'll let him tell you a little bit more about it. He's been in this field for close to 20 years, and it will bring a lot of wisdom to us. Welcome, Steve.
Well, thank you for having me on, Amy. I really appreciate it.
Okay. So tell me about your podcast and book and, what led you to do this?
All right. So the book was a total accident, first of all, because what I had done is I left a social service agency, and a lot of my former colleagues / supervisees and even supervisors said, your approach was always unique. Did you ever think about writing a book about it? And I said, not until right now. And I never had, everyone says they have a goal of writing a book one day. Never been in my radar. And so I wrote the book over 3 years. And what I mean by 3 years is that there's some chapters that were written 3 years ago, and then some of them came, well, this is like 5 years ago now, and then the other ones were written just before the actual book being edited. And I joke around with people that writing the book is the easy part. The editing and your editor going, no, is the hardest part. But after the book was released, I had a few friends. I had some other colleagues, therapists, and even people I didn't know. They're like, each chapter is kind of like a podcast. Did you ever think about doing a podcast? I'd listened to, a handful of podcasts right before that. And I'm like, okay, how do we do this? So I started exploring it. And as my therapist said, learn the process. Don't just get to the goal, because I've always been a goal-oriented person. Finish the goal, not the process, and respecting the process. So I respected the process for about 5 or 6 months, looked at how I'm going to do it. And then I started one in May of 2021. And, by May 2023, I will be on my 100th podcast, which is really, really exciting. And I never thought I'd get this season 2. So never mind 100 podcasts.
Mm-hmm. And what's the name of it?
The name of it is Finding Your Way Through Therapy. The same as the book. I'm sorry, I didn't even mention that.
And Finding Your Way Through Therapy. What led you to that name?
So basically what I've been told originally, and this has become true more than ever, is that my approach got people into therapy that would have never been in therapy. Part of my training was in the criminal justice system and working with parole and probation and even jail. A few times, like the officers of all of those three, they'd say, like, people are requesting to talk to you. They don't want to talk to anyone. So that became something that was important. And when I started outpatient in 2003, I know I'm dating myself here, a lot of people came to me that stayed, and they're like, how did you make them stay? And so for me, it's always, I got into therapy knowing that I was intimidated by the process when I was a kid. So trying to break down that intimidation factor was how that motivation for the book came from. And ultimately, because of my approach, and, people say I'm a very realistic type of therapist and I make them think differently, then I think that that's a little bit of what happened. And the podcast kind of reflects that. I mean, when I talk to people on the podcast, a lot of people say it sounds like I'm listening. Like I think someone recently said to me, it sounds like I'm listening to two friends talking. And I'm like, perfect. That's what I want, because I just don't want it to be so staged or just like, that's how I do therapy. That's how I live life. And authenticity is also very important to me, which I think Finding Your Way Through Therapy is exactly that. When you go to therapy and you're not authentic, what's the point of therapy? So you try to bring that in the podcast, bring that in the book, and in general, just my training that I've had.
Right. You talk about people that would not normally come to therapy. A lot of people that have been through trauma, worry about coming to therapy, a lot of shame or guilt, or just prevents them. What do you say to that?
Well, I tell them it's not going to be easy. And I tell them that, but when you actually open up, eventually it gets easier. And I will never say that by the end of therapy, it's going to be easy. It's going to be easier. And I said, if you're willing to live with those realistic parameters, then yeah, I'm more than willing to work with you. And what I find is that because I take that approach of easy or not easy, or trying to make promises I can't keep, I think that that's really made people approach therapy differently when they come in with me. I've worked with people for 3 years before they open up, and they're like, why were you so patient? It's because I don't want to talk to a stranger, for the first year or so without opening up. So sometimes with trauma, particularly, it takes time. I do eye movement desensitization, or EMDR. And what I tell my clients, I get some referrals from the outside from other therapists, but my clients, I'm like, let's get to know each other for at least 6 months to a year before we do EMDR, because you're going to be talking about really hard stuff. And by like getting that kind of like trust with it prior to therapy, to me, is key. And I know that's not the EMDR method. That's my method, and I'm fine with that. And I think that that's why I think that telling them realistically what will occur is the key to everything. And authenticity is the other one. I think that for all therapists that are authentic, it makes, I'm a big Brene Brown fan. So try to be myself most of the time.
Right. I think I know when I was in my own therapy journey, it was probably much longer than that before I started opening up. It's like, I'm not telling this stuff. I'll just sit here and talk about random stuff.
I go back to Kristen Bell's therapist, and this is an old interview she said, and I love what he said. He says, you can't expect to walk 20 miles into a forest and get out into 5. So when you're working on mental health, you're not going to go like 10 years of stuff will not come out in 5. It will take time, and that's okay. And I really like that explanation. It's the explanation I give to most of my clients.
That's a great explanation. I know you talked about being unfit for recovery.
Yes, that was one of my podcasts for January 2023. It was a great one. Unfit for Recovery was a great interview with Jake Nichols, and people can go buy his book. I don't get paid for saying that. I'm just saying it. But Unfit for Recovery was such an amazing interview, because he talked about who fits in the mold of recovery, who wants to recover, how does it work, and will I ever get to recovery? And he goes through the interview on that, and people can go listen. I don't want to spoil it completely, but he really talks about those methods, how he is a pharmacist. He talks about the difficulty some people face in regards to recovery and stuff like that, and he's a great advocate. So I definitely would encourage people to go back to that episode, listen to it. And he talks about his own traumas too, so which is important, because a lot of my podcasts are about trauma.
I know that, with trauma and in my practice, everyone talks about that definition of recovery too, but it has to be different for everyone because we carry our own journey, our own stories, and traumas can be different for everyone. So we can't always find that perfect mold to fit into.
Well, not every trauma is the same. So how can it be a mold to get to where you need to be? My recovery story that I give to a whole lot of people, this is on my podcast, and I've said it to a whole lot of people, I want to say it to you too, is I once had someone who came on parole, they came to me, is like, he only has 15 days left. Can you get him to stay sober for 15 days? Because he had drank and relapsed, and they were trying to keep him out of the jail, which is very, very good. So I brought him in. He's talked to me. I said, you're going to come in daily until your parole's over at least. He's like, yeah. What's that? I said, that was a little wooden Buddha on my desk. And he said, it's just a Buddha. He's like, can I have it? I said, is that going to keep you sober? He's like, yeah. I said, okay, you can have it. And I don't know where he is in his journey. This is years ago, but he stayed sober for all that time. And all the parole officers were like, how did you keep him sober that long? I'm like, I gave him a wooden Buddha. I don't care what works as long as it works.
Did you replace the wooden Buddha?
Yes, I did replace them several times. As a practicing Buddhist, I do have a lot of them, and I replaced it, and it wasn't the same. And I think I did that purposely, because it's sometimes, even as a therapist, you got to let go of certain things, and letting go of that Buddha was important to me, and learning to do that for my own spiritual belief system is important.
Mm-hmm. I have a damn it doll that sometimes like clients use, and those come and go too. I don't know if you've seen those.
Yeah, I've seen those, and that makes sense. And for me, like Buddha's gone a few times. I have like two or three things like that, trinkets that people really have enjoyed. And then I think I bought Feeling Good, the New Mood Therapy by David Burns, probably 8 times because I keep on lending it out. And I think it's that stuff that really means a whole lot to people.
I came across the concept where people put the library card. Well, I'm going to age myself now, where it has the actual envelope in the back with the index card.
I remember that. So we're both
Yeah,
aged.
okay, where that's actually in the back of the book, and where you just keep lending it. And I think that's just really neat. But I started doing that some with books, where you just keep passing the book on.
I think that at one point I started dating myself. I wouldn't do that anymore. On a legal pad, I started writing, okay, Feeling Good has gone to Jane Doe. Braving the Wilderness has gone to, Jane and, Frank Thomas. I don't have any of those clients, just making those names up. But yeah. And then eventually I'd be like, oh, Frank Thomas graduated, forgot to ask about the book. Oh, Jane Doe's gone. I forgot to ask about. I'm like, all right, they're gone. I'm just gonna buy a new one. So that's how I did it.
Mm-hmm. And you can just keep supporting the authors anyways for that.
And that's why, like, for me, the other thing too is, I was actually talking to another podcaster right before this, and we were talking about how we're not in competition with anyone. And I'm not in a competition with any authors, any podcasters, any therapists, because we're all going to contribute something different. So if we really practice in life the letting go of this competition, because I'm not in competition with Amy. We just met over right now, and we've exchanged a few times, but I'm not in competition with Amy. Anything I can do to help Amy, it's a good thing. And I think that if you live life like that in general, it's liberating. So,
No, 100%. And I think it's also that modeling that we can do for those we work with too, that, we can just lift each other up, and that's only going to help those we work with and our clients too.
and that's what I like about helping people in general. So why wouldn't I do that on the podcast realm?
Exactly. You talk about mental health stigma a lot, and that's something I see with my patients, their families. They're afraid to help others, or not, or tell others their struggle. Had a client this morning that was scared to tell, like her small group, that she's dealing with something. How do you navigate that with your coaching with people that you work with?
In general, like for the therapy part, that what I address is shame, because shame is a powerful thing, not in a good way, but definitely shame. It's like, so holding that in for yourself, how is that helping you? How is that contributing to your life? How are you feeling better about that? And when they kind of see that there's not really anything good about that, I say, okay, so what would feel good? And then bring them to that point of view. And I think that, based on, what you talked about your podcast is about, that's what narcissistic people wait on. That's what they want. They want you not to talk about stuff, because that keeps them in the prison that they created for themselves and or by the narcissistic individual. So for me, it's like, what are you gaining by holding it in versus what are you going to gain if you talk about it? If someone's really stuck, they'll probably still keep it in. But for the most part, people get to a point about expressing it. So on a therapeutic standpoint, I tell people it's just liberating to let go of stuff. That's why, like, for me, I've been very open about my mental health struggles, my mental health work that I do with my therapist. I talk about the losses I had when I was young, and that used to be all the shame based stuff. Like, I was 12 years old and I had to be a real man. Yes, in the 80s, that was how we worked. I not quite what happened in January with that football player, but I had one of my friends who died in the fire who played football with me. And my mourning/grief stage was like, well, that means he won't be there for the game on Saturday. You better play harder. And that was my grief. And so I've learned that, the shame kept me stuck there. And I don't want to let anyone live in shame. We all have shame. It's normal in some ways, but living there is not normal. And that's how I work at it. And on a coaching standpoint, I talk about the feeling of shame. Shame, how, where does it come from? What is the base of shame? And it's usually like discuss with yourself, and learning to like identify that it's not just disgust, because it's also fear. and there might be anger in there. And learning how to identify all those emotions so that you can clearly define them for yourself. I'm a big Brene Brown fan, but I'm also a big fan of you kind of like need to define these emotions for you, because happiness is different for Amy than it is for me. Sadness is different for Amy than it is for me. So learning to just identify those emotions, what they mean to you, and if they're a little more complex, like overwhelmed, well, where does overwhelm come from? Being able to identify all the emotions that play a factor takes you away from counting on one singular one, because we all have our preferences. And this is always going to sound sexist, but it's not meant as a sexist thing. I'm a feminist, really. But for men, anger is their go-to. They want to be happy or angry. Those are the ones that they'll go to. For women, sadness and happiness is usually the ones they go to, because they can be sad. They can't be really fearful all the time, and they can't be angry because it's not feminine. And I don't believe any of that crap, by the way. I'm just putting it out there. But learning that we're complex individuals who can have all those emotions plus more just releases us from just holding on to one singular one.
I know for myself, the shame was built in with a lot of the disgust and things that happened to me with abuse, and feeling like something was wrong with me and for the things that had been done. And until I let that go and realized that was not me, it was hard to let go of the shame.
Yeah. And letting go of the shame is key, right? I mean, how did you feel when you let go of the shame?
Felt free and able to move on.
And I think that's what we all want, right?
Mm-hmm. And then it was also that, mental headspace was able to do more because there wasn't just like fuzz. And I found it was like, oh, I can actually complete more tasks. I can be able to check off that to-do list. I don't even need a to-do list because I can remember more things. And it was just, feeling more accomplished.
And I always tie the to-do list to shame. I can't do enough. There's always something. And I use something from I feel like I'm plugging books left and right here. I'm making zero money for this. Atomic Habits. And instead of being shamed about the to-do list, I have my barbells here. I can't really move them, but they're over there, I promise. And so when I complete a task, I'm put it in there and I'm like, oh, I'm actually accomplishing stuff, instead of looking at a to-do list that just shames the hell out of me that I didn't do enough. So that's another trick about the shame. But getting out of hard relationships, sometimes we're when I work with clients that are stuck in these relationships, it's hard because shame will make you feel certain ways, and people will tell you, well, that was your fault. And then you start, blaming yourself, and there's guilt, and there's a whole lot of different things. And I tell people, you can feel whatever you want. I'm not going to take it away from you, but you don't need to put up with this crap. And that includes the crap you put on yourself. You can be happy. You don't need to be guilty. You don't need to be shamed. I know it takes time to get to that point, but I'll walk you through it. And that's usually how I work. People in particularly like abusive relationships, whether mostly emotional, there's always physical and sexual, but the ones I particularly work with is emotional ones, and really getting away from that emotional abuse so that they can feel liberated. And sometimes people continue those relationships in a more even pattern, which is also amazing to see sometimes, because they tell their partner, I'm not putting up with this crap. And if you continue, I'm leaving. And the partners, the narcissistic ones, they push them away and they blame them, and that's fine. But other ones are kind of like, oh crap, I got to get my shit together. I'm going to lose this woman. Sorry for the swear if you need to bleep it out. But ultimately, for me, that's like where I have a lot of women that I've felt that I can empower through good boundaries, getting work on the shame and the guilt, so that they can feel like I can say whatever I want to my partner. And if the partner doesn't like it, I don't need to put up with that stuff anymore. And empowering people is a complex thing. I made it sound like we can do that in 2.5 sessions. It's not easy, but getting to that point is something that very liberating. And a few relationships that continue to this day are based on the partners just pushing back on their mostly male partners.
And I'll be real, it's a year thing, not a few session thing. But and there's that third where you get rid of the partner and then you continue that narrative toward yourself. So it's the same language, the same words, the same swearing, but it's toward yourself. And so it doesn't end yet. So then you have to stop that and start, using the same boundaries with yourself.
You also, that internal chatter is just, like, I can't remember the exact stat because it's in my other office, but what is it about? We have 60,000 or so thoughts in a day. 80% of them are negative and 95% are repetitive. And when I tell that stat to people, like, I know that sounds absolutely crazy, but absolutely true also. And it's working through those and having that negative thought about yourself. Hey, I'm not perfect. I know that. Most people don't see all the stuff that I think I'm wrong. Mostly it's my own thoughts that do that.
It's like, wait, I'm not in a relationship because someone used to tell me that all the time, but I'm repeating it to myself all the time now.
Yeah, and it's a good one to do. You gotta tell yourself, I'm in a relationship with me. That's great. That's hard enough as it is.
Yeah, so quit saying that shit to myself.
Yeah, well, we all have like my one of my part, but and I know it's another person, but a colleague of mine called them ants, automatic negative thoughts, and learning how to talk back to those ants is really helpful.
Yeah, instead of stomping on that ant pile and causing them to spew everywhere.
Oh, here's some more ants. Thank you very much.
One other thing you talk about, I think this part of your program is identifying, how you want to feel so you can better manage it.
Yes.
So for someone that doesn't even know what they feel, how can they identify how they want to feel?
The basic stuff that I do, and this is one of my first things that I do with coaching, is okay, what does anger mean to you? What does sadness mean to you? And I don't go Google it and Webster Dictionary, give it to me. What does it mean to you? What's your narrative on that? And I think narratives are very key to identify those emotions, because fear is something that people see as visceral, like, a saber-tooth tiger coming at you. The fact of the matter is there's not many saber-tooth tigers left. I think zero. But fear can also be, what if I say something wrong on this podcast and it's taken out of context? Well, that's a natural fear, and it's normalizing it and making sure that you can define what that fear means and what does it also encounter for you. So my fear of, I said, I'm, the sexist part earlier that I said, if you cut it out, I can sound like a total sexist individual. But then you got to think, okay, who would do that? Also, can I talk back to that? Can I talk to that person? And then learning to also do that. So defining the emotions, where it comes from, because most people just have simple definitions. Anger is complex, fear is complex. Happiness is frankly complex, because we want, everyone wants happiness, and I get that. No one's happy all the time, and that's the tough one to sell for a whole lot of people.
So your coaching program, what do you do with this? What are people going to experience if they do your coaching program?
I love having people who join the coaching program, so because there's a few things that are unique. My first unique thing is I do texting twice a week. And there's a lot of different things there. I don't want to sell it all, but one of them is defining those emotions and being able to kind of like exchange on that for a while. And then having two coaching sessions per month so we can have those verbal conversations, how we define the emotions, how are we going to address it in the future, and what can you do to talk back to maybe the misconceptions you have about it and how it's keeping you stuck. So that's kind of what I do. And we, as I think that I call it the primary emotion versus the secondary and tertiary emotion, and how can you identify the secondary and tertiary emotion that brought you to that point. Anger doesn't come up on its own. It usually comes out with fear and disgust. Can come from happiness because you're afraid your happiness will go away. So there's a lot of different things. So I identified a primary one, and then we look at what's behind it in order to address it in the future so that you can manage it better. So that's the coaching session. But the texting, like I said, there's a lot of definitions. There's other stuff that's really thought provoking so that you can bring it to the session so that you can move forward as an individual. And obviously, if people want more than twice a month, it's also available, and that's happens, not all the time, but it happens pretty often.
And how can people access information about the coaching program or register or sign up?
They can definitely go to my website, which is www.steve-bisson.com. They can go DM me through Instagram, LinkedIn, or Facebook. I'm all on those. And I'll respond to you and we can definitely sign up. But the best way is the website, because there's a Calendly there, and we'll set up a 15-minute conversation. Because if it's not ready for coaching, because the best way, one of my guests, I go back to, I think it was Bethany Amatucci, who said that to me in February last year. Coaching is about the future. Therapy is about the past. And, sometimes people are like, oh, I want to resolve my trauma. Okay, that's not the program for you. And I respect that. And I will, you can look for a therapist. And if you're looking for something, I want to manage this better in the future, then, hey, I'm your man. And I always have that 15-minute conversation, make sure that it fits what the person needs versus me telling them what they need. And I think that that's one of the things that a trend in coaching that I don't like is that sell. I don't sell. I know my program's good, but I'm going to tell you if it's going to be good for you, because making a buck off someone is not my goal in life. Making someone feel better and managing their emotions in the long term, now that's my goal.
That's a great description, with coaching being about the future.
Yeah. Bethany had said that, and it was one of my podcasts last year. And I'm like, I'm going to hold on to that.
Yeah. So all those links he just shared will be in the show notes, so you can access the website and all the other links. Any final words?
I think that what I would like people to know is that more people have been in therapy than you know of. Number one. Number two, therapy is not lying on the couch. It's not taking medications and talking to someone. It's not ketamine. It's not electroshock. It's something that will work individually for you. We have tendencies, that's life, but also looking at therapy being a unique program for you. And for those of you who are just on medications, it's not sufficient. Medications will help you process information so that you can be better in the therapy session, but medication itself will not change your thought process ever, ever, ever. So those would be my, because finding your way through therapy is all about going there, and emotional management is to get you to the other side so that you continue managing it. So to me, is a continuum of stuff here.
It's a tool in the toolbox, but therapy is always needed.
I like that. And I've always said to a person, like, if I'm trained in cognitive behavioral therapy, but I don't show up at my plumbing issue with just one tool. I show up with 12 tools. So CBT is one of them. It's probably the most important one for me. But, my emotional management coaching sometimes shows up in therapy because that's a good tool. I do some behavioral management stuff. I do EMDR, but looking at the belts that we have is just being able to tell people, use the tool that works for you. I'm not showing up with a hammer at a plumbing issue, because that hammer ain't going to help. So bringing the right tool is also very important to every situation.
Great. Well, thank you for being on the podcast, and thank you everyone for listening. Please subscribe and please listen to the next episode. Thank you so much. Thank you again for tuning in to our podcast, Hope After Narcissistic Abuse. We hope you were able to leave with some renewed hope. And if you like what you heard, please subscribe to the channel, give us a review, head to the show notes for more information on the things that we highlighted. And there's also a link to the website for a course that we offer on the same topic, Hope After Narcissistic Abuse. Thank you again, and please tune in to the next episode.